I'm Krista Lewis, and sometimes I'm Pippa Jane, and you're listening to The Featured Voice with Jacques, an audio flow podcast series, because these voices deserve to be heard.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 5 of The Featured Voice. We are in season 2, and we're just about done here. We've got one more episode after today's, and I can't believe that season 2 will be a wrap here soon. And so I hope you guys have enjoyed yourself. I hope you have visited the libraries of the narrators who have been on this season's series, and made some friends and some connections. So that is always the goal for The Featured Voice, is that I can introduce you to some people and their work, and you can go out and support them. So this week's episode and this week's guest, I met actually at APAC this year, and I had a chance to chat with her. Don't think we took a picture, but she had the best personality, lots of fun. I've been following her around on Facebook and Twitter. She's a very humble person, very supportive, and she's all around fantastic lady. And I'm so excited that I get an opportunity to chat with her today. And I hope that after we finish the chat, you guys will head on over and pick up some of her books and go by and like her Facebook page and also follow her on Twitter. So please help me welcome this week's featured voice guest, Karen White. Hi, Karen. Welcome to The Featured Voice. How are you?
I am very well. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. You know, I'm in the Midwest, and so the weather has changed drastically in October. How's the weather where you are?
Yes, well, thankfully, summer is over here in North Carolina, where it is very hot and humid in the summer, as you can imagine. And fall, I don't know, I can't tell. Sometimes I think fall is my favorite season, but then sometimes I think spring is my favorite season. But it's definitely between those two.
You know, I lived in North Carolina for 18 years.
I didn't know that.
I lived in Raleigh. Went to college there and ended up staying, bought my first home there. And I love North Carolina. But you know what I hate about North Carolina? Take a guess. Take a guess.
Well, I won't go into politics. So
No. It has something to do with the weather.
It can't be the barbecue. It has something to do with the weather?
Yeah.
Well, there's probably humidity.
It's the pollen.
Oh, the pollen. Yeah. The pollen is terrible.
It's
and
awful.
That's fall and spring. You can get it both times.
It just doesn't matter what time of year it is. You come outside, all that yellow stuff's on your car, and then you're sneezing and you're doped up on Benadryl all year. It's just, ugh.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously that affects one's vocal health. But, you know, I started recording audiobooks in Los Angeles, and what's tough there is it's so dry that can affect your voice. So it's a trade-off. I did have some allergies there, but definitely worse here in North Carolina. But even though the humidity is annoying and, you know, makes everything stick to you and all that, it is so much better for your voice. There's always something that you have to deal with, you know, to keep your voice healthy. But I prefer the dealing with the allergies here.
Well, see, there you go. Everybody, go and deal with the allergies. Move to North Carolina because of the humidity, and everything helps your vocal cords. So yeah. That's it. That's the end of the show, everybody. Thank you for no, I'm just kidding.
That's how you definitely do it.
No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so I let everybody know that I met you at APAC earlier this year. Well, actually, I didn't make it to any of the conferences, but still all the same, I met you earlier this year, and it was just a really enjoyable chatting with you, and I've been following you on Twitter and things things like that. And I'd love to know, what's Karen's background? Did you do any theater or any acting or anything before you started your journey into audiobooks? Because I really don't remember that being something people said they wanted to do when they grew up, was, record audiobooks. But so I'd just like to know kind of what your background is and how you made it, how you decided on this career path.
Well, I was definitely a theater geek. Starting in 6th grade was my very first play, and I didn't stop doing plays until I had children, and that pretty much killed doing plays. Because it becomes so expensive. Because depending on where you live, performing theater, either you make no money or you pay money, but even when you make money, it's not a lot. So it becomes very expensive. So I did work as a professional theater actor in Boston for a good long time, both before and after graduate school, where I studied. I got a master's in fine arts in acting. Okay. And from my experience both as an audiobook narrator and as directing new narrators, which I did for a long time, and talking to others in the business, working in the theater is definitely the best background for becoming an audiobook narrator. And for me specifically, I think the things that really helped me were a couple things. One, I did several one-person shows, which is essentially what an audiobook is. You're sort of doing a one-woman show here.
Yeah.
There's no audience here in my booth with me.
Right.
And then I loved performing Shakespeare, but I was never really an ingenue. I mean, my voice obviously is low, and it's always been low. And my looks, my voice, I just was not like the pretty young thing ever. I was always sort of a character actor. And so I figured out early that there were really often, most Shakespeare plays, there are 1 or 2, maybe 3 or 4 female roles, and then 25 to 30 male roles. Right. So early on, I started auditioning for the male roles. And I think that has really helped me. I have played a lot of men. And I think that, gives me that's another thing that has really been helpful in audiobooks. And then another thing is I also ended up playing a lot of roles in the theater where there's this one show I did twice called Holiday Memories, and it's an adaptation of 2 stories by Truman Capote into a play. And one is a Thanksgiving memory, and one is a Christmas memory. And it was obviously a show we did in December. And the characters, there were 3 characters that were the boy and his aunt, and then sort of the narrator. And then there were 2 other actors, me and a guy, and we played all the other characters.
Oh, wow.
So, it was all about costume changes and it was everything from an 11-year-old girl to a 25-year-old teacher to an 80-year-old grandma to the dog.
Oh, so my God, the dog?
I wasn't on stage. I would voice the dog from off stage while the characters on stage would mime it. I was very proud of the fact that often people would come backstage and want to meet the dog.
The dog had fans.
Yeah, they thought we had a real dog that was working backstage. So I also do that in my audiobooks, that if a dog's or a cat or parrot voice is written, they're not, it doesn't just say barks, but it says woof, then or meow, I do my best to really sound like the animal.
I don't know. I love it.
And I've actually done a parrot 3 or 4 times now. Oh, more than that. Jill Shalvis has put parrots in 2 different series. And then I did a kid's book where I was a parrot, and I had a book come out this past summer where this woman had a parrot, but it was imaginary. It was like in her head, but it still sounded like a parrot. So
it seems like you really enjoy those animal voices because
I do.
You've kind of done a lot. Is that on your portfolio? Like Karen does animal voices? How do you kind of utilize that when you're going in for auditions? I also do animal voices. Here's a list of them right here.
Yeah. Well, I have audiobooks has been, besides that one play, is the only other place that I've used this skill. But it goes back to when I was a kid. You know, we would play house, and I would always just want to be the dog or the cat or the pet lion. You know,
I never
wanted to be mommy.
You were very creative and you knew how to use your imagination, which sometimes I think is lacking in with today's children, is they don't really have, because everything is technology for them, so they don't really have the, I guess, the desire to be as creative and imaginative as, you know, we were back then. And, you know, like you mentioned, you wanted to be the dog, of course, and I guess, and I don't know what I always wanted to be a robot. So I would always go around and we would be playing outside and I would always act like I was a robot. That's interesting.
That is interesting.
I wanted to be a robot.
That's cool.
I wanted to be a robot or some kind of like evil it wasn't a vampire, but some evil character. I don't know what that says about me, but yeah, I don't know.
You need to exercise your demons.
Yeah, you know, get it all out because, you know, it's just like Halloween. People, for some reason, they like to dress up as an altar or maybe that person that they desire to be, but they can't be in real life. So, you know, Halloween, you just kind of go all out because it seems like it's okay then.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think people kind of need that license to be crazier than they are in real life, you know, whether that's playing an evil or a dark character or just something silly. But you can definitely see that. I mean, how so many adults like to dress up. It's not just for kids.
Exactly. And some adults do try to go trick-or-treating. Not knocking on doors though, but they do go trick-or-treating. But yeah, we'll just leave that there. So you think about that. But anyway, so Karen, I'd love to find out, do you remember the first audiobook that you put out and how long ago was that?
Yes, I remember. It was in 1999 that I recorded it, and it was in the summer, so I assume it came out before the end of the year. It is not available anymore because I've looked for it. And I don't remember the exact name, but it was like a gossipy tell-all book about the Kennedy family written by somebody who had been like a secretary to one of the women. That's all I remember. That's all I remember. Well, what I do remember the recording process because I had just been hired by Books on Tape, which doesn't exist by itself anymore. It has been bought by Penguin Random House, but and they were in the process of building studios in Los Angeles, and so I was working as basically as the assistant to the director of the studio. And before the studios were ready, they were wanting us to get some books done. So we were going around and subleasing studios. And the one that we happened to use for my first book was in the Valley in California in the summer, where it can be very hot. And this studio was so hot. And I had just found out I was pregnant with my first child, but I was only like 7 or 8 weeks pregnant, so we weren't telling anybody yet. But I got so dizzy because I was getting, I think, dehydrated during the recording, but I didn't want to tell my boss. So I just had to pretend I was okay. And whoa, there's a train.
There is a train, and so sometimes people on the show get blessed by the train. The train
Oh,
gods go by, and so you got blessed by the train gods today.
oh,
So that means you are now a part of the society. So welcome.
thank
But those boots, I know a lot of people say that they're really hot, and gosh, you had a couple of whammies going on. So you're in this booth, and it was very hot, and you were pregnant all at the same time. And so how did you even survive that recording with that? I mean, besides drinking a whole lot of water, and you didn't tell anybody that you were pregnant. So how did you survive that?
Well, I'm sure at the time he thought I was an insane person, but I was just, and I was also nauseous. Like I didn't have morning sickness. I had all the time sickness. So I would just like eat crackers and drink tons of water and just power through, you know, how you do
Hmm.
when you just, and I think the only good thing about it was it made me less nervous about actually recording my first book. I'd been doing other things around audiobooks up until then, but I'd wanted to narrate, and
Hmm.
so I think because I had to pay so much attention to not throwing up and not fainting that I didn't get nervous. So that's probably a good thing.
Well, yeah, I guess that, diverted your mind to some other things. So I guess that always helps finding something else to focus on.
Yep.
So so let's talk a little bit about pre-narrating. And you mentioned earlier that you did some directing and coaching other narrators. And so what was it like kind of working on the other side? I guess, of the wall or the other side of the booth per se, and doing some of the coaching and directing versus actually going in and being the talent.
Well, what I actually first started doing was editing, um,
Okay.
because I was an actor and I was in Los Angeles and working, but I didn't like working on camera that much. I just wasn't very good at it, frankly. And I, I knew if once I got married and we were thinking about having kids, that doing theater would be difficult, but I wanted to do something. So someone told me about audiobooks and I started looking into it. But at the time, the main company that was recording audiobooks in Los Angeles was called Dove Audio,
Mm-hmm.
and they worked primarily with celebrities doing abridged versions of books, which it's amazing. Like hardly anybody does abridged versions anymore that I know of. But that's what they did, and so I got myself a job, even though I had no idea what I was doing. I just learned on the fly, editing sessions. And back then, we had so many people working on a single book. They would they would give me the digital audio tapes. I would take them home and then dump them into my computer, which you would have to do in real time. It
Oh
would take.
gosh.
Luckily, they would pay me for that. And then I would go through with the script and I would do the rough edit. So because they would just talk, just read, and someone would mark the script when they'd screw up. And so I would get rid of all the bad takes. And then I would dump that from my computer onto another digital audio tape. And then I would drive it to Beverly Hills. And then somebody else would do a cleaner edit, the fine tuning sort of edit. And that was great. I did that for about 9 months before I started working for Books on Tape. And so listening to someone read and screw up and listening to people who were really very talented and people who were terrible at it, but they were celebrities, so they were doing it anyway. That was it was like a class in audiobooks, hearing what worked and what didn't. And then when I worked at Books on Tape, and I was running audition sessions that we were having, casting sessions, and so again, hearing what worked and what didn't. And then I also started directing after working basically side by side with Dan Musselman, who was running that studio and who had been directing audiobooks for years. So it was all a great training ground. for when I finally started recording my own. And then I would also have Dan for the most part, and then additional people as he hired more people to direct me. So I feel really grateful that when I started, I was directed by someone, and I also had engineers working on the book for the first 6 or 7 years before I started self-directing.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that has given me such a strong or such a good ground level of work, so that when I'm working on my own, I have all that, so I can help figure out again for me what works and what doesn't work. What's a bad
Right.
take, good take.
You know what's funny is that you gave me that really long process of what it was like to edit audiobooks prior to the process now. And if we had ACX then, I mean, we'd probably be waiting a couple months just to get a book, because that was a long process. I mean, that you had to go through. And so now I'm so grateful for technology that it doesn't, I mean, it still requires some work, but not as much as, what you were going through with going through the script. And they don't still do all of that, do they? I mean, it's got to be a little bit easier now with some things in technology for the editing process.
Well, it depends on the company. Penguin Random House and some other publishers, and I think it depends on whether it's, again, a celebrity or someone who's an actor, who's not just an audiobook narrator, who is not as experienced of an audiobook narrator. Mm-hmm. Some companies still do what's called a straight record, where you have a director on the outside with a script, although now it's a PDF on an iPad and you're using a stylus rather than a pencil and a giant stack of paper. But you still, and I have actually, this past May, I directed an author doing his memoir, and nice. He did a straight record, so that I had to mark on the PDF every time he started a sentence over. And then there is still an editor who will have to go through and get rid of all the bad takes. Mm-hmm. So some publishers still do it, but it is speeded up by the fact that we can just upload things and download things and, not use paper. But most of us, I would say probably 80% at least of us recording books do what's called a punch-in record. Mm-hmm. We basically edit as we go. Mm-hmm. So that when I give over my raw files to the producer, there's no extra takes. Only the good takes are there, because I have placed the clicker on the sound file where I want the restart to be. And then I just, hit the keyboard, 2 keys on the keyboard, and it restarts recording where I left off.
I think somebody else mentioned that is a punch and roll.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some people call it punch and roll, and some people call it punch in.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing for anybody that's recording anything. I might need to invest in that myself. Yeah,
I think Pro Tools was the first software to enable that, and it really is what has made self-directing even possible. And then I think there are other software, recording software options, but I don't know what they are.
That's totally fine. Anybody that's listening to this that's a narrator, I'm pretty sure that they can go back in and they can respond and comment later and tell us what kind of tools that they use. But I like that a lot of people are kind of doing their self edits as they go along, which I think makes the process a lot easier, and we can get the books a lot faster because we're greedy listeners, and that's basically, it's all about us anyway. So I'm just telling.
Right.
So, Karen, what's your process like when you are getting ready to record a book? And for the most part, Karen, do you do romance, or I guess I should start with that. What genre are you mostly known for right now?
Well, in romance, I think I'm mostly known for contemporary, although I have done um, some paranormal slash suspense. Um, and I think I'm kind of well known for doing stuff that's funny, being able to find the humor. But generally, as a narrator, I really do just about everything. I don't do much children's, and I've done some fantasy. I guess I really haven't done any science fiction. Um, the bulk of my work, I would say, is nonfiction. Um, Everything from self-help to history to science to economic things. I mean, stuff that's really informational, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And I get to learn really interesting things. Like I did a book this year called The Secret Lives of Owls. And it was this nature writer who herself just became fascinated with owls and started following owl enthusiasts around and writing about these different breeds of owls. And she talks about the environment and all this kind of stuff. And like, I probably would not have chosen to learn about owls on my own, but I got to it. It was really interesting. And again, tried to recreate the owl sounds.
I was just going to say that. So it's a win-win. You got to learn about owls and you got to hoot.
Yes. And they have such different hoots. That's what's so interesting. I found the Cornell Ornithology Lab has a great website, and they have examples of every owl's calls.
Wow.
That was part of my research.
That's wow. So now I want to go and find this book about owls just so I can hear you do the owl calls. Is that weird?
No, I don't think so. It's a fascinating book too. I mean, and her writing it's not dry. It's really kind of emotional. You know,
Mm-hmm.
She kind of develops, both she and these people that she follows are passionate about, saving owls' habitat and, protecting owls and studying them and reporting on them. And again, the technology,
Mm-hmm.
the things that they have developed that they tag the owls with so that they can follow their migration patterns. It's just lots of interesting stuff.
So is it safe to say that well, I won't say this, but what's been the genre that's kind of been your favorite, that when you receive those projects or those contracts that you're, really excited about?
Well, honestly, I think for me, I am excited when I get something that is completely different from the thing I just did.
Okay.
And I feel so lucky that that is mostly how my career goes. I'll do a self-help thing, and then I'll do something that is about, some history book, and then something about economics in China, and then this lighthearted, funny romance, and then maybe something that is really an emotional fiction work, some sort of, I guess, what they call chick lit or women's fiction.
Mm-hmm.
You go on this huge emotional roller coaster, and then it's back to a business book. So I'm easily bored. So I like that I get to do really different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some variety there, it seems like you enjoy it when they're not back to back the same. So That sounds interesting. And so when you are not working and you're not narrating or anything like that, is there a specific genre that you enjoy either reading or listening to? Because I'm not sure if all audiobook narrators listen to audiobooks. So I don't want to assume that you listen to them frequently.
Yeah, actually, I don't have a lot of good listening time because I have no commute and I have 2 dogs that I walk every day, but my dogs are so crazy that I can't listen to anything, music or anything, because
Oh, no.
I have to pay attention to the environment in case there's a rabbit or another dog or a bicycle. I have to like be on these dogs. Um, so mainly it's if I get to go on a trip. And so when I listen with my kids, then we're listening to either podcasts or sometimes I can talk them into an audiobook.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's usually like YA at this point. But when I'm on my own, my favorite thing to do is listen to short stories, a
Mm-hmm.
collection that has a whole bunch of different narrators. So then I can kind of listen to different people's styles and takes. And if I don't like the narrator, I can just skip the story, So, because I'm kind of picky. I think we all are,
We are picky. Yes.
Sometimes
Yes.
it's not that they're bad. It's just, I don't like it.
Yeah.
And I think everybody's like that, it's just
Mm-hmm.
maybe and I know people feel like that about me too. Like I remind them of their ex-wife or the teacher in 6th grade that they hated, they might even know that, but they just hear my voice and just, it's like nails on a chalkboard. I can't. So I think we all have that. Voices are very, especially an audiobook, if it's in your ear, it's an intimate experience and you have to be able to connect to that person.
Yes, you should say that again. Say it again, Karen.
Well, I think, it's so personal, which makes it hard when you're trying to choose a book for a family, because everybody's got an opinion.
Yeah,
So
that seems like that would be difficult. I mean, my dog doesn't care when I'm in the car. He could care less about what I'm listening to, but
he's never howled or whined with a certain narrator.
no, but he doesn't like me to sing. Does that count? He's like, please stop.
That's like my teenagers. I'm not allowed to sing along to the music. They're like, stop! You're terrible.
Well, at least Dallas can't talk, but he makes a face, and it's like you can stop now. And I'm like, come on, Dallas, dance with me. And I'm singing, and he goes in the other room. So obviously I'm not that entertaining to him. So it's unfortunate, but you made a good point about the intimacy of listening to an audiobook. You do have to connect with the narrator, and I think that for listeners, we usually will have to connect with the narrator before the story, and that's really important. And when you can't make that connection, that love connection, then unfortunately I have to read the book, which means that it's going to take me longer to get through it. But Karen, I listen to audiobooks everywhere. You said something about your listening time. Look, I'm in the shower with the audiobook. I've got a little spot for my phone, and it's now sort of waterproof now. And then I really want to like bolt some speakers in there so I can hear surround sound. Do you think that's carrying it away? Is that too much?
No, you go, girl. That's
I want speakers around the shower so I can hear.
One of my kids brings her phone into the shower, and I am concerned about that. I think that's yes, because I think the phone is not going to survive this process.
It will. It will survive now because they have these new phones that are sort of waterproof up to a certain amount of feed, I think. But if you're in a shower, the phone's not going to drown. It may get drizzled on or sprinkled on or something, but I've got a nice space where the water doesn't affect it, and the sound kind of bounces off the wall, so I can get that, that kind of surround sound feeling. But that's because I don't want to miss anything. I get right to a good part, and that's like, now you need to go shower, but I want to hear this other part. So, I'm kind of not patient. I'm impatient. So I need to hear it everywhere I go, like everywhere. That's just me.
Well, no, I think you're not alone. I think a lot of people are like that. And that's one reason why audiobooks have exploded so much, is that people like, the phone makes it so you can take that with you everywhere.
Mm-hmm. I love it. So what's your process when you're getting ready to record? Are you reading the entire book? Are you skimming through the book? Do you have somebody who actually helps you prepare for that process?
Generally, no, I don't hire anybody, but I read the whole book, unless there's some sort of problem that I can't. But I like to read the entire book before I record, and I can't even think of only one time that I didn't do that, and it was just because it wasn't available. Mm-hmm. But I just feel like I have to know the whole emotional arc of the story, and then I take a lot of notes. I type them up. I highlight things. I do some publishers, if it's usually a nonfiction book where there's just tons of pronunciation questions. Like I did a book on herbs that you use for, it's sort of alternative medicine. Mm-hmm. And so it's great that the publisher did that research for me. But I kind of like, even though it takes time, I like doing the research, because then I really know what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. I've looked it up and I've heard it myself, and then I make the note. And again, that's all part of the learning and getting the book sort of in my head before I start.
Yeah. And so how much time are you normally spending in your booth? Is it like you're home away from home? Are you spending, how many hours? I like to know how many hours you're in there. And you're in North Carolina, so what's your way of staying cool in your booth?
Well, my husband built my booth. It's built into the house. Okay. And it has a connection to the heating and air conditioning system of the house. But in order for it to be quiet, the air, whether it's hot or cold, has to go through a really long tube. So you can't hear the fan at all by the time it gets into the booth. So it's very weak. So in the summer, it can be quite hot, and in the winter, it can be chilly. But body heat warms up a space. So in the winter, I just put a little fan in that I turn on, a little sort of baby heater fan, and in the morning and warm it up, and then after that, it's fine. In the summer, I just sweat. I just and sweat. That's okay. I lose weight, I guess. I don't know. Or it's like having a sauna.
A sauna or a sweat box.
Yeah.
But that's the funny part, is that everybody that I've spoken with has this pretty much that same issue. It's like in the wintertime, it's okay, I can stay warm. But in the summertime, it's just hot, and I always wonder how people survive that. So at least while the rest of us, well, at least you don't have to go to the gym and work out. You just go to work and and you sweat off 10 pounds. That sounds
well, I wish that were the case, because I am just sitting here. So I lose the walk, but not real. There's no exercising happening here.
Well, I heard that you can lose pounds just by sitting. So if you're sitting in your booth and it's hot in there, I mean, I'm pretty sure you can shrink off some inches or something. But I've seen you and you look amazing. So you don't need to shrivel up or shrink anything. You look great.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, so know that you kind of gave us an idea of the genres that you have recorded in. Are there any that you haven't done yet that you'd be interested in doing?
I would like to do more kids books. I did the Mrs. Piggle Wiggle books when I was early on in my career, which was so fun. I don't know if
Oh,
you know those.
that
They're
sounds
very old.
cute.
They're from like the 50s and they're very funny. But I think I would love to do science fiction. It's just that more women need to be writing science fiction,
Right.
you know?
Mm-hmm. Gosh, I can't even think of a sci-fi isn't really a genre that I'm really familiar with, so I can't even think of who writes sci-fi. That's sad. I should be able to know at least one book. Let me think about that. You should find more women that are writing sci-fi with strong heroines so we can get you in there. It's my extension of sci-fi. I mean, I'm gonna group sci-fi with steampunk. Is that kind of on the same pattern?
Yeah, that, and I did one or two stories several years ago that were romance steampunk, and that was really fun. I'd love to do more of that. I would like to do more romance. I think people think I do more than I do,
They
but I
do
really
think you
only
do.
worked with a few authors, um, and then a few one-off books here and there. But I'm always looking for more romance authors to work with because I just feel like we all need more love in our lives,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a good way to do it.
More on the contemporary romance. Are you thinking adult, new adult, young adult, or does it matter?
I don't think my voice is really appropriate for young adult, maybe not even new adult. So I think more in the adult. And I love contemporary, but I like doing a suspense too. I
Mm-hmm.
what I don't like that much if bodies are being chopped up and serial killers and that's tough. I have a hard time with that. But I
Yeah.
did record a few years ago some of Patricia Cornwell's books. It was a backlist thing, and I love the doing the pacing of of, of mystery suspense.
Oh, look, the train came back for you. So that was all because of the mystery suspense. You said that, and see, you got an instant sound effect. That's awesome. Well, this is the goal of the feature voices, that we can get this particular podcast out and get some of those authors who write in those genres that you're looking for, and let them know that you're available and want to work on their projects. So outside of bodies being chopped up and things like that, Karen would like to stay away from those. However, if you write a sci-fi book, and she likes romance, adult romance, then you can definitely check out Karen's demos and audio library. And Karen, before we leave, I always ask people about accents because that's always a fun topic when we're speaking to our narrator. So, is there an accent that you do that you think is less challenging, or one that you have had a chance to perfect? And on the flip side, is there an accent that you would see in an audition and just kind of cringe and say, I try to stay away from those?
Um, well, as we talked about earlier, I think I am from North Carolina, and Virginia and Kentucky, actually. That's where I
Ah,
grew up. And
okay.
I went to school for acting in the Northeast and had my accent removed.
Ah, boo.
Painful. Um, but especially because I'm living there now, but because my family's from here, um, I find all the varieties of coastal and mountain southern accents to be really fun to do because I hear these people all the time. I go to my kids' sports games and I'm just out in the world and I'm surrounded by these really juicy Southern accents. And so
Mm-hmm.
I love doing those accents. And I did live in England for a year, so when I was in school, so I am passably good at a few British dialects, but the one that I will not do is Scottish. Um, and I have actually turned down books that were set in Scotland because I could do with a lot of work one character who's a
Right.
Scot, but to do a whole village, forget about it.
Not a whole village. A
Right,
one-off, one character, but not 10.
right. And then I don't know why, but Australian and New Zealand are also really hard for me to get in my ear. I just can't. That and South African, they're all, I get confused between them. So I try to avoid those as well.
That's funny. A lot of people say they try to avoid the Scottish accent. So now I feel like I need to go and listen more to Scottish accents and see how, I mean, they're all going to be difficult to me because, you know, I've just got my one accent from whatever it sounds like. But I guess there's just something really different about Scottish accents that people find are more difficult. I always thought Russian accents were difficult, which seems like more people are able to grasp that than Scottish.
Yeah, I think maybe it's the because Dutch and Swedish and Norwegian accents are also difficult. I think it's something about where the placement is
Hmm.
in the back of the mouth that makes it hard. Um, the way the jaw is used, I don't know. It's just hard to reproduce.
I wish I could see you like what you were doing when you were thinking about that Scottish accent. Like, did you make faces and kind of when you said something with the jaw? I just
I
picture that in my head.
Yeah, yeah. I do tend to. I mean, I don't record myself video performing very much because I know I must look ridiculous. Uh,
I want to see it though. You should on your next audiobook that you're working on, if there's some type of accents or there's a character who has I don't know, a funny tone or something, just please record it for me so I can see what kind of faces you're making or what you're doing with your mouth. I want to
I
see.
I will.
Okay, thank you. All right, Karen. So, you've had a pretty busy year. So, from January up through now, what's kind of been the book that if you were introducing your work to new audiences, and I know that's difficult because you've done a lot of genres. So, what's a book, I guess, that you think was kind of, I don't want to say favorite because then that makes it seem like the others weren't. But what is something that you would like to recommend to me? If it was my first Karen White audiobook, what is something you'd recommend that I should listen to?
Well, can I say two?
You can.
Well, in the romance world, I think one of the authors that I've done the most books of, and I think it's just because I really get her humor, and so she requests me, and that's Jill Shalvis, and um, one of her books. It's in the middle of the series, but her books work pretty well as standalones. It's called Chasing Christmas Eve,
Okay.
and that came out at the end of September.
Okay.
But it is just a great example of humorous contemporary romance with just a feel good story with really great characters. And so I would recommend that.
Okay.
And you can imagine me when, of course, I had to record it in June in my very hot. Yeah. So you can imagine me doing a Christmas story in June. That'll be fun. And then a book I'm really proud of and excited about, and I'm really hoping is well received, is by an author who lives in my hometown here in North Carolina. His name is Wiley Cash, and
Hmm.
I've been a fan of his. This is his third book. I've read both of his other books. I did not do the audiobook none of the points of view were sort of appropriate to me. He's had multiple characters, and the first book was men and an older woman, and then his second book was a young girl and men. But this book, it's a historical fiction, and it's about a real woman who was a pioneering union organizer in mill towns in North Carolina, near where he grew up in Gastonia. And it's a great story. It's a hard story. It has a lot of sadness in it, but it's beautifully written and really interesting backgrounds on all the different characters. And talk about accents. This book was full of many different Southern accents, as well as someone who was from Latvia and someone who was from Eastern Europe, but then grew up in New York. I mean, these people who had layered accents, which is always a really interesting challenge. But it's called The Last Ballad, and it's a really beautiful book. So if you want to read some literary fiction, I would really recommend that. And then I've just started talking about this, but I have actually written a romance novel.
Oh,
and
yay.
I'm in the process of I'm still, working on getting it in the best shape editing wise, but I'm hoping to publish it in 2018, either traditionally or self-published. So just keep your eyes open for that.
Well, congratulations. And I did take notes on those 2 recommendations that you gave me. And so once your book comes out, I'll have to have you on my other podcast, Booking Around Town, so I can get the inside scoop on the book.
That would be fun.
Yeah. So how was that experience you've had this really nice journey of going from acting background and doing editing and some directing and voiceover work and moving into publishing. So did you know that early on at some point that you wanted to write a book, or did that just, kind of hit you one day, I'm going to write a book, and then you start that process?
It was a little bit of both. Especially when I lived in Boston, I created a bunch of theater pieces with other people, so sort of writing in collaboration. And I always loved doing that, but it was hard for me to just sit down and write, because I would think, oh, that's a dumb idea. Oh, that's a dumb idea. So a couple of years ago, I started writing a book with a friend. It was actually a middle grade book about girls and soccer, but then it just wasn't working for her. She got too busy. And so I finished that book, but I don't think that whole area is my super strength. Maybe I'll go back to it someday, but then I thought I had what I thought was a fun idea for a romance novel. And I feel like, having recorded so many and read so many, that I kind of get the structure of it. I did even more research on that, and something about doing that book with my friend kind of got me going. So I was able to set my editor brain to the side and just write, and then bring the editor back in later. And so that's been a really interesting process, to refining that and making myself write every day, and figuring out how to do research and incorporate that. And so it's just been fun. I mean, like I said, I get bored easily. So this has been a whole new fun adventure.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, I get bored easily too. And it's just like you, I try to keep myself occupied with new things. But gosh, when do you sleep? I mean, you have a family, and then you've got your audiobooks, and then you're writing, and I just do you sleep, Karen?
I do sleep. I sleep a lot. But what has definitely, well, one, my kids are older, and one of them can drive the other around, so that helps. You don't have to drive kids so much anymore. And then the thing that has suffered, I have to confess, is cooking. I used to cook a lot from scratch, baking and cooking, and I don't do that as much anymore. We eat a lot of salads.
Oh gosh, your poor
Frozen
family.
things, from Trader Joe's. That's what.
Oh, that's well, if you've got somebody who can drive, I'm sure they can cook. So, you know,
Yep.
uh so there you go. I mean, but at least you're eating and you sleep. So that makes me happy that you're just not up, staring at the clock and you never sleep and you've got somebody else to do the driving. So you're good to go. So, but you should definitely try to cook something at least once a month, Karen. You got to do the whole scratch thing. You're from the South. You can't be buying biscuits at the store. You got to
Oh no,
make those biscuits.
you're right. I gotta make a pie every once in a while,
Yes.
and
Yes. I will be in North Carolina in September. So you just go ahead and start preparing and you make that pie. I'll swing by and come and pick it up.
all right, you let me know.
I will. Okay. Well, Karen, please tell everyone, all of our listeners, how they can actually find you on social media or on the internet.
Well, my website is pretty basic. It's KarenWhiteAudiobooks.com. And it's probably easiest just to find me on Facebook from there, because I think it's hard to find me on Facebook, but I think it's Karen White Narrator. And then Twitter, where I do a lot of talking about books, I am Karen White Reads.
Yeah, okay. So everybody write that down. And yeah, she is very active on the Twitter. That's what I like to call it. Very very active on the Twitter. And I think that's where I follow you. I mean, I follow you on Facebook too, but it seems like a lot of people in the industry, especially narrators, use Twitter a lot because you can just kind of write something really quick and it gets retweeted and everybody's on there. So be sure that you go and follow Karen on the Twitter and her Facebook page, which is oddly enough, she doesn't really know the name of it. So you just find it's so funny and people like Facebook. I think it's but yeah, so the thing is, on your website, are there links that will drive people directly to your social media as well?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So then that would be the safe bet. They can go to your website in case they get lost, and they can find you. But yeah, you're right. It's Karen White Audiobooks, which is just like your website on Facebook. So
Oh,
Karen
okay.
White. I looked it up for you. See how handy I am?
Well, you know why it's hard? I think it's because when I go on Facebook and look at my page, the address is different than when someone just tries to find it.
Yeah,
Like my
that's true.
link is different. So that's why it's confusing.
It has your profile listed as Karen White Audiobooks, but if they just did a search with the at button, is at Karen White Narrator. So maybe that's the
Oh,
difference.
that's what it is.
But we can find you because you're Karen White, and your lovely face is there, and there's a picture of like a beach.
Yep,
Is that a Carolina beach?
that's Oak Island, which is just south of Wilmington, and that's my daughter and my niece.
Oh, I
That's
love it. I love North Carolina beaches. They are absolutely beautiful. Um, so if you've never been to North Carolina, go and check out the beach because it's really nice, especially in the summer. It's hot, but at the beach, it's a totally different atmosphere. So,
it's true. It's nice in
uh,
the fall too, though. It's not crowded, and you can get cheap rentals, and it's great for walking.
and that's because it's north, but make sure it's before hurricane season. Just
Oh yes, that's
yeah,
true.
we don't want to go there during hurricane season. So, um, but anyway, so thank you, Karen, so much for being with us here today on the Featured Voice. It's been my pleasure chatting with you.
Well,
And
I enjoyed chatting with you, and I'm so glad I met you.
I'm glad I met you too, and hopefully you'll see me again next year, and we'll get to sit down and chat a little bit more. And everybody, in case you didn't know, I do have a collection of swag, and Karen gave me some ideas for persons who narrate more contemporary romance, adult romance, and things like that. So I will be unveiling that before the year is over, and the collection is in honor of Karen White. So she didn't know this, but it is in honor of her for giving me the idea to do it. And Karen, you won't know what it is either until closer to the end of the year. So just be sure that you're following me on Twitter, and I will make sure I tag you, and you'll be the first one to get your swag, the Karen White collection.
I am excited.
Well, good. I'm excited too. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of The Featured Voice. Be sure that you are following us on Facebook, as this is an Audio Flow production. So you can find us at The Audio Flow on Facebook or on Instagram at The Audio Flow, and also on the Twitter at _audio_flow. All of our series are broadcasted on iHeartRadio as well as TuneIn, and you can also download our episodes on iTunes and Google Play. And we are also on YouTube under Booking Around Town. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us. Special thank you to my producer Danielle at Firefly Productions and my assistant Rebecca, who always keeps everything taken care of. And so everybody, thank you so much for listening. Have a great week. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks everyone so much for joining us for this week's episode of The Featured Voice. Be sure to tune in next week to meet our featured voice guest, Krista G. Lewis. For more information about the Audio Flow or The Featured Voice, visit us online at www.theaudioflow.com. Until next time, remember, lend them your ears because they definitely deserve to be heard.